Welcome to Mind Overboard, the channel where we take a deep dive into seemingly simple questions and interesting topics and try to provide an alternate perspective. This discussion is an attempt to bring together a few thoughts that have been running through my mind recently. The Catholic Church has been back in the news for a little while, and promises to be present to some degree for the foreseeable future due to newly unfolding investigations into child abuse allegations. More recently, I've also run across some detailed discussions in which Jordan Peterson has expounded his views on religion, emphasizing the idea that religion in general and the Judeo-Christian tradition in particular provide us the benefit of an ideal standard toward which we may strive. The question, utilizing evidence proffered to us as a result of the difficulties faced by the Catholic Church, is whether or not this is true. As seems to be the duty of most public intellectuals, Jordan Peterson is engaged in several detailed conversations about religion. It doesn't appear to be a topic of primary concern for him, but it seems if one spends enough time addressing the public on various topics and social issues, the subject inevitably comes up. Like many who would want to sidestep the potential discomfort that comes from digging deep into someone's personal theology, he essentially takes a standard position that, while there is a separate question regarding the truth of the propositions of religion, it does, on a whole, appear to be a force for good through which a lot of people partake in acts of charity and goodwill. To his credit, his reply is much more thoughtful than the standard response, in that he manages to take this sentiment and find a place for it within the broader framework of his worldview. What he says essentially is that religion played an important role in early societies by promoting the formation of male hierarchies centered on completing important tasks. This created an opportunity to put competencies first and an environment where more capable problem solvers could assert themselves and rise to the top, resulting in sexual selection by women. He also refers to it creating the concept of the spirit of the father, and emphasizes the importance of creating an ideal standard by which individuals can compare themselves. This sounds reasonable enough and has the ring of being vaguely encouraging. Let's take a look at some examples to verify if it holds up to scrutiny. I mentioned the semi-recent news regarding the Catholic Church. It may count as recent, if for no other reason that it will likely take years to sort through, but the basic situation with the Catholic Church requires no elaboration. The most surprising aspect of its reemergence into the headlines is that, despite the extensive and well-documented investigation that uncovered a horrifying consistency of sexual predation against children and young adults, the covering up of which involved numerous high-ranking clergy in a variety of local and international jurisdictions demonstrating a systemic problem and resulting in a multitude of criminal cases, wasn't actually the whole story. While all of this information did arise from the original investigation, any actual criminal recourse was confined to the jurisdiction of the specific state attorney general who elected to bring charges. Interestingly enough, by not having a statutory mandate to report abuses, the highest official complicit in the cover-up, Cardinal Law, the Archbishop of Boston, never had charges brought against him. It is only more recently that several other attorneys general, feeling the general atmosphere was now amenable to this type of investigation, have opted to pursue these matters in their own states. What we have already witnessed was simply the investigative framework upon which additional branches of criminal activity, previously reported but unresolved, will develop. There's extensive testimony, written and oral, that illustrate the thoughts and feelings of Cardinal Law after the full extent of the situation came to light. And while he does admit to making general mistakes in judgment and has also agreed that his desire to protect the institution of the Church motivated him to seek to minimize public exposure, there also seems to be a more insidious implication underlying his testimony, and this is the notion that there is such thing as universal redemption. This concept, coupled with papal authority, combine in a very dangerous and incestuous way. As an example, in the case of the priests spirited away, if the presumption is that these are good men who made mistakes, it doesn't take much to then assume that the ultimate punishment they face, or the constant torture of their own presumed conscience, will provide adequate pressure to ensure proper future behavior, or ensure a proper degree of appropriate punishment. Furthermore, if this is a spiritual issue, and spiritual redemption requires an adeptness with certain rituals or propitiations to account for sins, who better to lead this effort than the offender himself? They can spend their days in quiet reflection, paying God for what they did, while also rehabilitating in whatever way possible, when in reality they continued their abusive behavior whenever given the chance. This is a line of reasoning available only through the combination of believing in a higher authority, viewed through a tradition of recognizing a stringent hierarchical structure of authority. As an aside, I always try to ensure that I'm arguing in a way that's not disingenuous, and this claim, involving decisions most normal people would never make, almost feels like attacking a straw man. And this would make me reconsider my position if it weren't for the fact that it represents what actually happened. Cardinal Law had numerous opportunities to correct bad decisions, and even to make new, better decisions as new offenses were brought to his attention hundreds of times over decades, and he failed to do so. Further, upon his resignation in Boston, he was awarded a mostly ceremonial position in Vatican City by Pope John Paul II, a pope generally held in high regard. Another questionable decision. He remained in good standing with the Church and remained a vocal and influential voice, even serving on the papal conclave in 2005. He enjoyed these privileges for the rest of his life, never outwardly paying any consequences for the devastation wrought by his decisions. To hone this point a little further, we'll take a quick diversion through another example. If we're searching out instances that indicate religion sets a standard, and while Dr. Peterson may not be referring to the idea of an objective standard, this is likely the preference of most as theists. Can we derive this standard from theology without suffering dichotomous results? If we view the Bible as more than a wisdom tradition full of poetry and proverb, where we pick and choose the pieces most applicable for our purposes, then there's a certain degree of hedging required to reconcile the variety of possible interpretations. A common method of working around this involves simplifying the message. For instance, proclaiming that the only path to salvation is by accepting Jesus Christ as your Savior. Or, for someone confused by Jesus' moodiness in the Gospels, saying that the main message of Jesus is one of love and tolerance. The idea being that simplicity removes confusion. However, even in this axiomatic form, the message is still complicated by subjectivity. Just within the latter half of the 20th century, there have been several newly developed sects of Christianity that have applied an emphasis on the notion that our main objective is to follow the law of love, as pronounced by Jesus. Unfortunately, and despite the wholesome intent of this directive, these sects eventually descended into sexual exploitation, wherein the women, and eventually the children, were taken advantage of for the sexual gratification of the men, if not solely of the leader, in the name of love. This is not to imply that this sort of behavior is specifically Christian or inherent in the religion. The examples are meant to show the ease with which the standards and ideals can be subverted, which strongly indicates that, even despite scriptural authority, we're not dealing with an objective standard. It seems all but too obvious that the standards represented are derived from our own expectations and philosophies, open to interpretation and perfectly fallible. Any hope of correcting these mistakes relies on our faculties of reason. Although Dr. Peterson may not be referring to an objective standard, he is talking about an ideal. In either case, while this concept could easily be attributed to religion, in the way people generally regard religion, it's not clear that the concept is actually derived from religious practice. In other words, any standard set, regardless of where we seek out the precepts that define the standard, don't appear to actually be derived from anything other than our own prevailing values. This may not be problematic for Dr. Peterson, who may grant this is true, but if that's the case, there's no basis for insinuating religion offers us a more solid foundation. Scriptural-based doctrine is characteristically static. It doesn't change as quickly as our ever-increasing base of knowledge. Also, in the sense of setting standards, it requires interpretation with the strong possibility of descending into ugliness, as shown in the examples above. In addition, the general idea appears to contravene Dr. Peterson's prevailing philosophy around hierarchies. He often asserts that hierarchical systems are beneficial, and that they're efficient at creating opportunity, but that they work most effectively when there are measures in place to ensure a degree of parity. If a particular group monopolizes opportunity, the system will tend to stack too heavily at the bottom and become unstable. He frequently warns against creating a society with large numbers of dispossessed young men and a paucity of opportunity, calling it a recipe for disaster. This negative scenario seems to be encouraged by a system in which the primary concern involves pursuing an ideal standard that is, by design, unachievable. It's not completely clear why he would prefer this model. Self-improvement, self-reflection, pursuing goals, pursuing a well-rounded or spiritual life are all good things. It seems that partaking in these activities in pursuit of an impossible standard degrades the value of these endeavors. Acknowledging that our highest standard can be set based on our predominant values, but is subject to change or improve as our base of knowledge broadens and deepens, subsequently altering our values as we conform to our new understanding of the world, is a more reasonable and stable way to pursue this. It provides the opportunity to employ error-correcting strategies, including the possibility of completely starting over. While it could be said that these ideas could be a consequence of religious practice, it doesn't seem to follow that they're derived from religion, unless we would want to say that the concept arose at the very first moments of our development, in which we started to bury our dead and showed signs of spiritual reverence. But if that's the case, there's no reason to emphasize the Judeo-Christian tradition. As a result of this, it doesn't appear that there's a solid foundation for his claims in the sense that they're somehow tied to religion, as opposed to resulting as a natural consequence of our tendency to build communities and employ reason. This leads to the impression that Dr. Peterson's commentary, however astutely woven into his prevailing view, is likely an appeasement to the religious members of his audience. He found a place in his philosophical scheme to include religion, but the framework in no way depends on the presence of a religious aspect, nor does religion seem to provide the best explanation of the premises for which it's utilized. Do you disagree? I'd love to hear your argument in the comments below. Thanks for watching.